In the long arc of human prehistory, there comes a moment when sound begins to carry more than alarm or presence. Before words, before shared systems of meaning, there are calls, cries, and breath shaped by survival. The first sounds of our ancestors may not be so different from those of other primates. Sharp warnings, low reassurances, rhythmic vocalizations that carry across the savanna. Yet over time, these raw signals begin to take on new roles, shaped not only by instinct, but by cooperation memory and the slow unfolding of human capacities. To imagine these beginnings, one must step into landscapes where small groups of early humans move together in fragile bands. They depend on coordination to track prey, to avoid predators, and to share scarce waterholes. A sudden cry alerts others to danger in tall grass. A patterned call may gather the group at dusk. These are not yet words as we know them, but they represent a bridge between instinctive calls and the possibility of something more sustained and flexible. Archaeological evidence cannot reveal the first spoken sounds. Bone, stone, and soil do not preserve such ephemeral traces. Yet paleoanthropology gives clues through anatomy. The shape of the hyoid bone found in Neanderthals and even in earlier species such as Homo heidelbergensis suggests that the foundations for speech may have existed hundreds of thousands of years ago. The descent of the larynx in Homo sapiens, combined with changes in the vocal tract, provided a greater range of vowels, expanding the repertoire of possible sounds. This anatomical transformation did not by itself create language, but it made it possible for sound to carry greater nuance. A lesser-known detail is that not only bones but also genetic evidence contributes to this picture. Variants of the FOXP2 gene important for vocal control and sequencing are shared by modern humans and Neanderthals alike. This suggests that the capacity for complex vocalization is not unique to Homo sapiens, and that sound-based communication had deeper roots than once believed. Yet even with these foundations, the leap to true language remains mysterious. Some researchers argue that proto-language may have been gestural before vocal, with hands shaping meaning in silence long before voices carried across valleys. The human hand, already skilled from tool-making, could indicate directions, demonstrate techniques, and express reassurance. Perhaps early sound supplemented gesture, gradually gaining ground in darkness across distance or when hands were occupied. The interplay of hand and voice may have given rise to a new kind of communication, bridging physical presence with imagined reference. At the planetary scale, these beginnings unfold in a world that is vast, changing, and often unstable. Glacial cycles advance and retreat, climates shift between arid and humid coastlines, stretch outward as ice locks the seas. Against such transformations, the survival of small bands depends on coordination and shared memory. The ability to pass on knowledge, however rudimentary, is a tool as vital as stone blades or fire. A child learns which plant stings and which soothes not by trial alone but by sound or gesture from an elder. A group avoids a dangerous cliff because they have been told, not only shown. Across these shifting lands, language's first seeds lie in necessity. The mystery remains. At what point does a call become a word? At what point does a string of sounds cease to be mere association and become intentional reference? The absence of direct evidence leaves scholars cautious. Some argue that full language may have emerged only with Homo sapiens around 200,000 years ago. Others see in Neanderthal behavior care for the injured burial practices, use of pigments, suggestions of communication complex enough to demand structured speech. The truth may never be fully known, hidden as it is in vanished voices. Scale provides another way to grasp the stakes of this transition. A group of 30 individuals moving across a territory larger than modern-day Belgium needs ways to remain cohesive. They must track who belongs and who is absent, who has gathered food, and who has wandered. Calls can be made across a distance equal to the span of a large river. Yet when groups split and rejoin after weeks, the memory of individuals and the ability to signal belonging requires more than sound alone. Proto-language may have become a means of binding identity, of assuring continuity in a world where groups were small and fragile. The first words, if they existed, may have been names for places, for kin, perhaps for prey. Once a sound could be attached to a person or a location. A new possibility opened reference without presence. The world could be carried in sound, recalled, and shared. This capacity to displace meaning, to speak of the absent, marks one of the profound shifts in human history. The beginnings of sound, then, are not marked by invention, but by long, gradual layering. Calls that once warned of leopards may have acquired shades of meaning, not only danger, but which kind of danger, or how near or where. Rhythmic cries used in movement may have developed into chants that stabilized group pace or strengthened collective memory. Even simple differences in pitch, repetition, or tone could create a wider range of signals. Over time, the human ear became attuned to these subtleties, and the human brain learned to interpret them. Fossil evidence of cranial expansion supports this. The growth of brain regions associated with memory planning and social complexity suggests that communication systems grew in tandem with cognition. A group that could remember and transmit knowledge held advantage over one that relied only on instinct. Among the mysteries one lingers most strongly: was there a single threshold moment when language began, or was it always a spectrum, deepening over countless generations? The archaeological record offers no decisive answer. What is clear is that once language did emerge, it transformed the trajectory of the species. But in this first stage, the quiet beginnings are still fragile, more sound than sentence, more gesture than grammar. Across the savanna, in caves and by rivers, the earliest humans shape air into meaning, however tentative. The breath carries beyond what gesture can show. The sound begins to bind together not only bodies, but thoughts, memories, and the first traces of shared imagination. As the planet itself shifts through cycles of ice and warmth, these small groups carve continuity through sound. They do not yet know what vast histories will grow from their calls. For now, in the long prelude to words, the beginnings remain quiet, carried only by the voices of those who first dared to speak. The human throat carries in its structure a record of evolutionary trade-offs. Unlike other primates whose larynx sits higher and allows simultaneous breathing and swallowing with less risk, the human larynx descends, creating a chamber that permits a wide range of sounds. This descent comes at a cost: the potential for choking, a vulnerability not shared with most mammals. Yet this risk is the price of speech. The shape of the vocal tract, the length of the pharynx, and the flexibility of the tongue together give humans an acoustic palette unmatched among other species. To trace this transformation, researchers study not only living humans, but fossilized bones. The hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped structure that anchors the tongue and supports the larynx, provides one of the rare clues. In Neanderthals, the hyoid resembles that of modern humans, suggesting a similar ability to produce complex sounds. In earlier ancestors, such as Homo erectus, evidence is scarcer, though the shape of their vocal tract may have limited their range of vowels. The capacity for sound emerges in pieces across hundreds of thousands of years, shaped not by sudden invention, but by slow anatomical shifts. A lesser-known detail lies not only in bones, but in breath. human control over breathing is unusually refined. Other primates vocalize in bursts tied closely to the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. Humans, by contrast, can shape long, controlled outbreaths into phrases and sustained tones. This voluntary regulation of breath is central to speech and song alike. Some researchers suggest that this ability may first have been selected for in contexts like coordinated movement or ritualized sound before it was ever applied to words. Breath, in this view, is the foundation upon which language rests. The mystery lies in timing. When exactly did the human throat become capable of producing the full spectrum of vowels? Some argue that even early Homo species, perhaps as far back as 1.5 million years ago, had begun to approach the necessary anatomy. Others hold that only with Homo sapiens did the vocal tract assume its modern shape. The debate persists, complicated by the fact that soft tissues do not fossilize. The evidence must be pieced together indirectly from endocasts of skulls, from traces of the hyoid, and from genetic clues that suggest the timing of neural and muscular control. At the planetary scale, these transformations unfold against landscapes marked by shifting climates. As glaciers advanced, forests contracted, and savannas spread, humans found themselves in environments where communication across distance mattered more than before. Open spaces required calls that could carry, while complex social interactions within growing groups demanded finer distinctions in sound. The throat and lungs adapted not in isolation, but as part of a broader suite of traits linked to survival in changing worlds. The scale of migration reinforces this view. Groups moved not just within narrow valleys, but across regions stretching thousands of kilometers. To maintain cohesion over such distances, the ability to signal call and name became vital. The human throat became, in a sense, a tool for holding space together. Archaeological sites give indirect hints of this importance. Hearths that show repeated use suggest evenings where groups gathered, perhaps with voices rising in rhythm. Stone tools, shaped with increasing complexity, imply the need for instruction, something more efficient than gesture alone. Even the distribution of ochre pigments carried far from their sources points to shared practices that likely involved spoken exchange. These traces do not speak, but they suggest contexts where sound would have mattered. One of the unresolved questions concerns the relation between the descended larynx and speech. Deer and other mammals also show a lowered larynx, yet they do not produce language. In these species, the descent may serve primarily to exaggerate body size for mating displays. For humans, however, the descent appears linked to articulation, enabling a broad vowel space. Why did evolution maintain such a costly trait in humans, but not in others? The answer may lie in the intertwining of social complexity, cognition, and vocal control, a triad unique in its intensity among humans. Consider scale again, this time at the level of sound. A modern human can produce around 200 distinct speech sounds, though no single language uses them all. The range depends on the throat's structure, the tongue's flexibility, and the lips' precision. By contrast, most primates use fewer than a couple dozen distinct calls. The expansion of sound possibilities in humans is staggering, akin to opening a palette from a handful of colors to hundreds. With such variety, the potential for combining sounds into structured sequences becomes almost limitless. The expansion of sound also intersects with hearing. Fossil evidence suggests that the auditory capacity of early Homo sapiens was already tuned to the frequency range of human speech. This indicates coevolution. As the throat learned to shape sounds, The ear became more sensitive to subtle distinctions, reinforcing communication. The feedback loop between production and perception may have accelerated the refinement of language capacity. A lesser-known aspect of this interplay comes from studies of infants. Human babies are born with the ability to produce a wide range of sounds, many of which do not appear in the language they grow up hearing. Over time, unused sounds fade, leaving the repertoire narrowed to those that matter in a specific linguistic environment. This suggests that the throat and voice carry a potential broader than any one tongue, echoing the evolutionary flexibility that marked early humans as well. The planetary backdrop adds further depth. As climates oscillated, groups were pushed into new environments, dense forests, arid plains, icy tundras. Each demanded new strategies, new names, new sounds. In this way, anatomy and environment shaped one another. The voice did not evolve in a vacuum, but in conversation with changing worlds. The mystery remains how far back this interaction extends. Some scholars see in Homo erectus, with their long migrations out of Africa nearly 2 million years ago, the seeds of controlled vocal communication. Others hold that only with Homo sapiens emerging around 200,000 years ago did full speech blossom. The evidence is not decisive. What can be said is that by the time humans began spreading widely across the continents, their throats already carried the capacity for the full range of sounds we know today. Breath, voice, and throat together tell the story of potential unlocked. Each adaptation, each anatomical shift added a layer of possibility. The cost of choking was outweighed by the survival value of communication. The vulnerability of the human throat became paradoxically a strength. It opened the door to language, song, and all that followed. In this section of prehistory, the voice is still young, its powers not yet fully realized. But the architecture is in place. The air that moves through the lungs, shaped by the throat, sculpted by the tongue, becomes more than mere sound. It carries the possibility of memory, of teaching, of belonging. Across the vast and changing landscapes of the Ice Age world, humans take breath and turn it into voice, a fragile bridge to meaning that will soon span continents. The open savannas of Africa form one of the earliest stages where communication begins to take on more complexity. These landscapes stretch wide, dotted with trees and water sources, yet also exposed to predators. Here, groups of early humans must remain vigilant, coordinating movements and sharing awareness across distances greater than sight alone allows. In such a setting, signals, whether vocal, gestural, or rhythmic, become essential for survival. A sharp call warns of danger. A raised arm signals direction. A series of claps or strikes on wood may summon others from beyond the tall grass. Each gesture and sound holds weight, carrying meaning not in isolation, but in the shared understanding of a group that depends on cohesion. Archaeological evidence cannot directly reveal these signals, yet patterns in behavior suggest their necessity. Fossil remains show that early Homo species lived in cooperative bands. The butchering of large animals, often requiring multiple individuals to process and carry, indicates collaboration. Stone tools of increasing complexity point toward shared knowledge, something more efficient than trial and error. The coordination needed for these activities implies systems of signaling robust enough to be passed on and refined. A lesser-known detail comes from studies of modern primates. Vervet monkeys, for example, use distinct alarm calls for different predators, one for eagles, another for leopards, another for snakes. Each call prompts a specific defensive response from the group. If such distinctions are possible in non-human primates, It is reasonable to imagine that early humans expanded this capacity further, creating an even broader repertoire of signals suited to the varied dangers of open landscapes. Yet the mystery remains. At what point does signaling become language? Signals are typically tied to immediate context, a warning about a predator here and now. Language, in contrast, allows displacement, the capacity to refer to things not present. Whether early humans on the savanna had crossed that threshold is uncertain. The archaeological record provides no definitive answer, leaving only cautious inference. The planetary scale of this context is immense. Around 2 million years ago, climate fluctuations expanded grasslands across Africa, creating new environments that shaped human evolution. Open savannas demanded long-distance travel between water sources, exposed groups to predators, and rewarded coordination. Signals had to carry across space, often through air, vibrating with heat across landscapes where the nearest tree line might be hundreds of meters away. The expanse itself shaped communication, favoring sounds that carried and gestures visible from afar. The scale of movement was also vast. Early humans likely covered ranges of hundreds of kilometers, following herds and seasonal cycles. A group spread across such distances required not only moment-to-moment coordination, but systems for reuniting, for recognizing kin, and for recalling places visited before. Signals may have evolved into rudimentary naming, where a particular sound referred to a familiar waterhole or a reliable stand of fruit trees. Such reference, even if fragmentary, would have marked a step toward language as we know it. Evidence for rhythmic signaling adds another layer. Some stone artifacts show patterns of wear, suggesting they were struck together, perhaps not only for tool making, but for sound. The rhythmic beating of stones or sticks could travel across distance more reliably than voice alone serving as a rallying call. Over time, such rhythms may have acquired social as well as practical functions, reinforcing group cohesion through shared sound. This possibility aligns with theories that music and rhythm played a role in the evolution of language, with beat and tone preceding structured grammar. Another detail comes from the anatomy of the ear. Fossil evidence indicates that early Homo sapiens had auditory capacities tuned to the frequencies of human speech. But even before that, earlier species may have had hearing adapted to recognizing subtle distinctions in calls across the savanna. The interplay between signaler and listener voice and ear likely drove refinement in both. The unresolved mystery concerns how signals were standardized. In a small group, shared context makes meaning easier to sustain. But as groups grew or interacted with others, how did they maintain consistency in what sounds meant? Did groups drift apart in their signals the way languages diverge today? Or did constant contact and interbreeding prevent such divergence in the earliest stages? No archaeological trace can resolve this fully, leaving it an open question. At the scale of daily life, signals across the savanna served immediate purposes. A child lagging behind might be called back by a sharp tone. A hunter hidden in grass might signal silently with a hand motion. A mother might soothe an infant with a low hum. Each action reflects not language in the full sense, but communication adapted to circumstance, refined by need, and reinforced by shared memory. Over generations, such signals would have accumulated, forming a repertoire that gradually expanded. As humans developed greater control of voice and breath, these signals could be elaborated, layered, and perhaps combined. The savanna, with its openness and dangers, was a testing ground for these capacities. Scale can be considered in terms of comparison as well. The range of a human shout, perhaps several hundred meters in open air, is greater than the reach of gesture alone. Yet compared to the vast distances groups traversed, even this was limited. For long journeys, memory and agreement mattered more. If a group separated, they needed systems for rendezvous, prearranged signals or sounds recognizable from afar. Such systems would have strengthened the role of communication as a survival tool. The planetary cycles of glaciation and interglacial warming added further pressures. As rainfall patterns shifted, grasslands alternated with deserts, forcing groups to move or adapt. Signals across the savanna thus carried not only momentary meaning, but the weight of survival across generations. The ability to remember and teach signals to the young became crucial, embedding communication within social structures. This embedding may represent one of the earliest bridges from instinct to culture. The mystery of when such culture became language remains unresolved, but the groundwork was laid in these contexts. A final observation lies in the parallel between savanna signals and later linguistic diversity. Just as groups today diverge into thousands of languages, each with its own sounds and structures, so too may early humans have developed local repertoires of signals. Some may have been lost with the extinction of groups, others absorbed as populations met and merged. The savanna, in this sense, was not only a stage for survival, but a crucible of diversity where communication systems began to branch and multiply. In the end, signals across the savanna represent more than practical tools. They are the first sustained steps toward the symbolic, the first bridging of distance, not only in space, but in thought. Across wide grasslands under shifting skies, small groups of humans carried meaning through sound and gesture, testing the possibilities of voice and movement. What began as survival signals held within them the seeds of language, a development that would one day allow humans to speak across continents and through time itself. Stone and fire stand as two of the earliest technologies that shaped not only human survival, but the very conditions under which language could emerge. To strike stone against stone and shape a cutting edge requires attention, memory, and teaching. To tend fire, to keep embers alive through the night, or to carry them across distance requires coordination and shared responsibility. These activities form settings where communication must stretch beyond instinctive calls, where signals evolve into structured exchanges. Around 1.7 million years ago, Homo erectus crafted Acheulean hand-axes tools more symmetrical and standardized than those of earlier species. Such tools did not arise from chance alone. They required transmission of technique, something that may not be possible through observation alone. A gesture could demonstrate motion, but a vocal sound could reinforce the sequence or mark a step. The making of stone tools likely became one of the first contexts in which proto-language emerged, where sounds began to carry procedural meaning. A lesser-known detail comes from microscopic wear patterns on stone flakes. Some edges show use not only in cutting meat, but in working plant fibers, hides, or wood. This diversity suggests a broad repertoire of tasks, each with its own sequence of actions. Teaching such varied activities without words would have been difficult. Simple vocal markers, short sounds tied to steps, could have lightened the burden of transmission. In this sense, the stone itself became a canvas upon which early communication was practiced, refined, and stabilized. Fire deepened this process. Evidence from sites such as Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dating to roughly 1 million years ago, shows traces of controlled fire use, charred bones, burned sediments. Fire provided light, warmth, and protection, but it also created new social rhythms. Groups gathered at dusk, circled around flames, time stretching beyond daylight. In this glow, voices may have lingered freed from the immediate urgency of survival. Rhythmic chanting, vocal play, or rudimentary storytelling could have arisen here, expanding the range of communication from practical signals to shared experience. The mystery concerns how much of this communication was already language in the strict sense, and how much remained pre-linguistic. Did early humans possess words for objects and actions, or were their sounds still tied to immediate gestures and context? Archaeology cannot resolve this. Yet the coincidence of technological leaps with evidence for expanding social complexity suggests that some form of proto-language was already at work. At the planetary scale, stone and fire connect humans to elemental processes. The shaping of stone links human hands to geological time, breaking open rocks formed millions of years earlier. The tending of fire links human breath to solar energy stored in wood and released in flames. Together they represent humanity's first engagements with the deep forces of earth and energy. To coordinate these engagements required communication that was flexible, shareable, and increasingly abstract. The scale of stone tool transmission illustrates the importance of this shift. Acheulean hand axes appear across Africa, Europe, and Asia, a distribution covering thousands of kilometers. Their standardized forms suggest not isolated invention, but cultural continuity, maintained across vast distances and generations. To carry such knowledge required more than imitation. It demanded systems of teaching reinforced by vocal cues, rhythms, and perhaps proto-words. Fire, too, illustrates scale. A flame carried from one valley to another extends survival beyond immediate resources, linking landscapes through technology. To ensure continuity, groups had to remember and instruct how to keep embers alive, how to shelter them from rain, how to coax sparks into flame. These lessons, fragile and vital, may have given rise to some of the earliest structured sequences of speech. A lesser-known observation lies in the chemistry of fire itself. Ash deposits at early sites often contain traces of plants not otherwise found nearby, suggesting that groups gathered specific woods for burning. This choice implies knowledge of fuel properties, some woods burning longer, others brighter. The communication of such preferences tied to ecological knowledge may have required more than gesture. Words, or their precursors, could encode not just what was done, but why it mattered. The unresolved mystery lies in the rhythm of these developments. Did stone toolmaking drive the elaboration of communication, or did expanding communication enable more complex tools? It is possible that both reinforced each other, a feedback loop, where teaching sharpened skills and skills demanded better teaching. Fire added yet another layer, creating shared spaces where communication could be practiced beyond immediate necessity. At the scale of human groups, these contexts transformed social life. Toolmaking often required cooperation, one striking another, holding another, observing. Fire required constant tending, assigning roles and responsibilities. Such division of labor embedded communication within daily routine. The proto-words of stone and fire may have been repeated hundreds of times, reinforced until they became stable across generations. The broader planetary cycles of glaciation and shifting habitats added pressure to innovate. As climates cooled and warmed, groups needed to adapt to new foods, new landscapes, and new dangers. Tools had to be modified, fires carried further. Each adaptation relied not only on physical skill, but on memory transmission and communication. The throat and voice, already shaped by evolutionary trade-offs, became instruments of continuity carrying knowledge across unstable worlds. Consider scale in another sense. A hand axe made by one individual could remain useful for years. Fire once kindled could be carried day after day. In contrast, words or proto-words vanished in the moment of utterance. Their persistence depended on memory and repetition. Yet in their impermanence lay their strength. Sound could be adapted instantly to new contexts, new needs, new combinations. Stone and fire were durable, but words, though fleeting, were flexible. The interplay of durability and flexibility defined early human survival. The savannas and caves of the Pleistocene thus saw not only the birth of technology, but the birth of communicative systems shaped around technology. To strike stone was to shape not only tools but thought. To tend fire was to create not only warmth but conversation. These activities gave communication a foundation in shared labor and shared ritual. They turned sound from a mere signal into a medium of teaching coordination and imagination. In the quiet hours beside the flames, or in the measured strikes of stone against stone, the earliest words may have been born. They were not yet the elaborate languages of later ages, but they carried the first threads of continuity across generations, binding groups together in knowledge and memory. Stone and fire thus stand as more than technologies. They are contexts in which humanity learned to speak. Hunting was one of the most demanding settings in which communication took root among early humans. To track, surround, and bring down large animals required coordination that surpassed instinctive cries. A single misstep could scatter prey or invite danger from tusks, horns, or hooves. In this context, signals became refined and proto-language found fertile ground. Across open plains, groups moved with caution, reading the wind, watching for movement in tall grasses, and listening for cues from companions. A raised hand might freeze motion. A soft whistle might direct attention. A rhythmic call might signal readiness. Each gesture and sound had to be understood swiftly, for hesitation could mean failure or harm. Archaeological traces offer indirect evidence of such practices. At sites where butchered remains of large animals are found, cut marks suggest coordinated effort. Mammoth kill sites, for example, show patterns of dismemberment that imply multiple individuals working in sequence. These scenarios would have been difficult to manage without some form of structured communication, whether through gesture, sound, or both. A lesser-known detail comes from the wear on certain stone tools, which suggests repeated use in hunting-related tasks, from cutting tendons to scraping hides. Such tools passed between hunters or prepared in advance imply planning. Planning, in turn, implies communication about roles, timing, and place. It is unlikely that such coordination relied on instinct alone. The need to describe who would circle, who would drive, and who would strike may have encouraged the elaboration of proto-words tied to roles and actions. Yet the mystery persists how much of this communication was already symbolic. Did hunters name specific prey species with distinct sounds, or were calls still tied to context alone? Some scholars propose that hunting pressures accelerated the transition toward language, but whether this meant words for animals, locations, or strategies remains uncertain. The archaeological record, silent on sound, leaves the question open. At the planetary scale, hunting connects humans to vast ecological webs. During the Pleistocene, herds of herbivores roamed in great numbers across Africa, Eurasia, and beyond. To follow them meant crossing territories hundreds of kilometers wide, often through shifting climates. Hunting was not only an act of survival, but also a driver of migration binding humans to the seasonal rhythms of prey. To track these movements, groups needed memory shared across generations. Communication about where herds had been found, which valleys were rich, and which routes were dangerous may have required more than immediate signals. It may have required reference to the past and anticipation of the future. Scale adds weight to this picture. Consider the distance between a waterhole and a hunting ground, perhaps 30 kilometers apart. To coordinate such journeys, hunters needed to indicate direction, timing, and sequence. Simple gestures might suffice at close range, but over distance or in darkness, sound offered advantages. Calls, whistles, or proto-words could bind groups together across separation, allowing strategies that surpassed the limits of vision. Evidence from later hunter-gatherer societies supports this view. Among groups such as the San of southern Africa, subtle clicks, whistles, and signals served to coordinate during hunts. While these practices cannot be projected uncritically back into deep prehistory, they suggest plausible pathways by which sound was elaborated for hunting purposes. A lesser-known observation lies in the role of silence. Successful hunting often required restraint, the suppression of sound, to avoid alerting prey. In this context, humans may have developed not only ways of making signals, but ways of withholding them. The ability to control voice to delay utterance until the precise moment is itself a sophisticated skill, one that parallels the controlled breathing necessary for later speech. The unresolved mystery concerns whether hunting required the emergence of grammar. To coordinate a pursuit, was it enough to use single-word-like sounds, go wait circle? Or did groups begin linking them into sequences? The step from isolated calls to ordered phrases is one of the central puzzles of language evolution. Hunting, with its demands for timing and sequence, may have been one of the first arenas where this shift became advantageous. At the scale of daily life, echoes of the hunt carried beyond the moment of capture. Around campfires, groups may have recounted the day's pursuit, reinforcing lessons for the young. Gestures could reenact movements, while sounds could stand in for prey or actions. Over time, such reenactments may have given rise to narrative, the first steps toward storytelling. In this way, the hunt not only demanded communication in the moment, but also fostered the elaboration of communication in memory. Planetary cycles of climate added further dimensions. As glacial periods advanced, prey species shifted their ranges. Humans followed, adapting to new environments and new challenges. Hunting mammoths on the steppe required different strategies than tracking antelope on the savanna. Each adaptation likely brought new signals, new words, or new structures into being. The capacity to adjust communication to new contexts reinforced the flexibility that became a hallmark of human language. A detail often overlooked is the evidence of cooperative traps. Archaeological finds suggest that humans sometimes drove animals into natural enclosures or toward cliffs. Such strategies required precise timing and coordination, impossible without signals. The cries and calls used in these moments may have been among the most structured vocalizations of early humans, rehearsed, repeated, and remembered. Scale can be imagined in terms of sound itself. The human voice, shaped by the throat and lungs, can reach a kilometer in open terrain under the right conditions. Such range would have allowed hunters spread across wide arcs to maintain contact. The savanna and steppe became arenas where voice carried meaning across distance, linking scattered individuals into a coordinated whole. The feedback between hunting and communication may have extended to cognition, to anticipate prey movement, to coordinate group positions, and to recall past hunts demanded planning and memory. Communication supported these abilities, while the demands of hunting drove communication to become more precise. The interplay between mind, voice, and environment created a feedback loop that shaped the trajectory of human evolution. In the echoes of the hunt then lie some of the earliest rehearsals of language. Each call, each gesture, each shared memory of pursuit added to the repertoire of human communication. What began as survival necessity may have seeded the structures that later blossomed into grammar, narrative, and story. Across open plains, under shifting skies, the voices of early humans carried not only warning and direction, but the beginnings of shared meaning. The hunt, demanding and dangerous, became one of the great laboratories of language. As human groups expanded their ranges, the ability to remember and communicate about landscapes became as critical as the ability to coordinate in hunts. Rivers, valleys, seasonal grazing grounds, and migration routes stretched across vast distances. To survive, early humans needed ways of marking these places in memory and transmitting that knowledge to others. Words, or at least proto-words, may first have emerged as labels for features of the land, turning space into a mental map shared across generations. Archaeology provides indirect hints of this process. The presence of stone tools many kilometers from their raw material sources suggests that groups not only traveled far, but remembered where resources could be found. Obsidian transported across 50 kilometers or more, or shell beads, discovered 100 kilometers from the sea, testifies to journeys guided by memory and shared direction. Such movement implies communication about where to go, how far, and what to expect, demands that gesture alone could not easily meet. A lesser-known detail emerges from the pattern of repeated site use. Some ancient camps show layers of occupation season after season, year after year. The return to the same places suggests not only ecological awareness, but cultural transmission. Younger generations must have been told which valley held water in the dry months, which ridge sheltered herds in winter. The naming of such places, whether through spoken sounds or symbolic gesture, would have given stability to memory. This act of naming marks a profound shift. The landscape itself becomes encoded in human communication. Yet the mystery remains: when did reference to absent places truly begin? Signals can indicate danger or food here and now. But to speak of a valley unseen, to recall a river beyond the horizon, demands displacement, the capacity to represent what is not present. Some argue that this cognitive leap defines language itself. But whether early humans of the Middle Pleistocene had yet achieved it is uncertain. At the planetary scale, these developments unfolded against cycles of climate that reshaped the Earth's surface. Rivers shifted courses, deserts expanded and contracted, coastlines advanced and retreated with the waxing and waning of glaciers. To navigate such transformations required communication that could preserve memory even when the land itself changed. A dry basin might once have been a fertile lake. A valley now empty might once have teemed with animals. Knowledge of these changes preserved in words or proto-words gave groups continuity amid instability. The scale of migration underscores the importance of this capacity. Early Homo sapiens, spreading within and beyond Africa, traversed landscapes spanning thousands of kilometers. To move from the Rift Valley to the coasts, or from savanna to forest, required more than instinct. It demanded maps carried in sound and memory. The naming of rivers, hills, or paths became a way of binding people to place, of ensuring that knowledge of survival routes did not vanish with individuals. A detail often overlooked is the role of water in structuring communication. Rivers are not only resources but boundaries and guides. Following a river ensures water and orientation, but also demands decisions at each fork. To agree on which direction to take, groups needed shared reference points. A particular bend, a rock outcrop, or a stand of trees might become markers named and recalled. These names, whether simple sounds or complex phrases, form the beginnings of spatial vocabulary. The unresolved mystery concerns how such names were stabilized. Did groups rely on shared sound patterns that gradually became conventional, or did naming remain fluid, shifting with each generation? Linguists today study how place names often outlast languages themselves, surviving through millennia. If this pattern held in prehistory, the first names spoken for rivers or valleys may be among the most ancient words ever uttered, though now long lost to time. At the scale of daily life, the memory of rivers and paths was embedded in movement. Children followed elders along seasonal routes, hearing sounds or signals tied to landmarks. Over time, such associations became part of their own memory. Communication ensured not only survival, but continuity of culture, linking generations through shared geography. Firelight may have extended this further. Around evening gatherings, elders might have pointed into the darkness, naming places beyond sight, recounting journeys past. Even if words were limited, the act of recalling distant locations reinforced the link between voice and memory. Such practices represent the first steps toward storytelling grounded in space. Planetary cycles of rainfall and drought added layers to this process. During humid phases, regions such as the Sahara bloomed with lakes and rivers offering routes for migration. During arid phases, these paths vanished, leaving only memory. Communication became the means by which vanished landscapes were preserved in culture, guiding groups when conditions shifted again. The ability to recall lost rivers or forgotten valleys may have offered survival advantages when climates oscillated. A lesser-known clue comes from rock art and engravings tens of thousands of years old, some of which depict rivers, animals, or pathways. While these belong to later periods, they suggest that humans eventually externalized memory of space into symbols. Before that, however, the medium was almost certainly voice. Sound carried the map of the world, spoken from one generation to the next. Scale can also be considered in terms of comparison. The migration of early humans across Africa may have covered distances equivalent to the span from Madrid to Moscow repeated over lifetimes. To sustain such journeys required more than individual memory. It demanded shared communicable memory. Words for rivers, hills, and paths may thus be among the most ancient layers of human language, predating more abstract concepts. The planetary perspective reinforces this idea. As humans spread out of Africa and into Eurasia, they encountered vast rivers such as the Nile, the Tigris, the Indus, and the Yangtze. Each became central to survival culture and eventually civilization. The roots of this relationship may lie deep in prehistory, when smaller streams were first named, remembered, and spoken of around campfires. In the memory of rivers and paths lies the seed of later maps, stories, and histories. In this way, language became not only a tool of immediate coordination, but a vessel for geography carrying landscapes across time. The world was made legible through sound, and through sound it was remembered. The proto-words of rivers and paths may be lost, but their echoes remain in the continuity of human movement, the enduring need to name and to recall the places that sustain life. The emergence of symbolic behavior marks one of the profound shifts in human prehistory, a development closely tied to the rise of language. Symbols allow humans to represent ideas, identities, and concepts beyond the immediate world. When ochre is ground and applied to surfaces, when beads are strung and carried, when marks are scratched into bone, communication moves beyond gesture and sound into enduring form. Yet sound and symbol likely evolved together, reinforcing one another in ways that archaeologists are only beginning to trace. Evidence of symbolic activity stretches deep into the past. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, engraved ochre pieces more than 70,000 years old show deliberate geometric patterns. At sites in North Africa and the Levant, shell beads colored with pigment appear tens of thousands of years earlier. Such objects speak of shared meaning. A bead or mark stands for something not reducible to utility. This symbolic layer suggests a mind already capable of abstraction, and with it the likelihood of structured language. A lesser-known detail comes from pigments found far from their sources. At some sites, ochre deposits traveled more than 100 kilometers before being worked into ornaments. This movement indicates not only exchange networks but communication about value, color, and identity. Such interactions almost certainly required more than pointing. They demanded terms, however simple, for objects and their symbolic roles. The mystery lies in how tightly linked symbols and language were at their beginnings. Did the act of engraving or wearing beads arise alongside spoken words describing them, or did symbols emerge first as silent markers of identity, later drawn into speech? Archaeologists debate whether symbolic artifacts prove the existence of language or whether they stand as independent expressions of cognition. The connection remains unresolved, though the convergence of evidence suggests that both reinforced one another. At the planetary scale, these developments unfolded as Homo sapiens spread widely across Africa and into Eurasia. As climates oscillated, groups found themselves in new landscapes encountering not only different environments, but other human populations, including Neanderthals and Denisovans. Symbols may have served as markers of belonging in such contexts, distinguishing one group from another. Sound, in turn, could reinforce these identities, naming objects, colors, or practices that set communities apart. The scale of distribution underscores this role. Similar beads and ochre markings appear across vast regions from southern Africa to the Middle East, hinting at traditions shared or transmitted over distances of thousands of kilometers. Such spread suggests networks of interaction sustained by both objects and words. A detail often overlooked is the use of ochre not only for decoration, but for practical purposes such as preserving hides. This dual role, practical and symbolic, may have blurred distinctions in communication with terms for pigment carrying both functional and social meanings. In this way, sound and symbol intertwined, reinforcing each other's significance. Another layer of evidence lies in cave art, though much of it appears later, around 40,000 years ago. The hand stencils, animal figures, and abstract signs that cover cave walls in Europe and Asia testify to symbolic systems that likely had spoken counterparts. A painted bison may have been accompanied by words naming the animal, recounting its habits, or embedding it within myth. While the paintings themselves endure, the words that may have surrounded them are lost, a silence that underscores the fragility of sound compared to symbol. The unresolved mystery concerns the order of emergence. Did sound give rise to symbol by allowing humans to articulate abstract thought, later externalized in pigment and bead? Or did symbol give rise to sound by providing external anchors for meaning? encouraging the elaboration of spoken terms. The two may have been inseparable, unfolding together in feedback loops of cognition and culture. At the scale of daily life, symbol and sound entwined in rituals, adornment, and teaching. A necklace of beads might signal belonging, reinforced by a spoken term for the group. A mark on a stone might serve as a reminder of a place, accompanied by words naming it. In such settings, the line between object and sound blurred, both serving as vessels of meaning. Firelight gatherings may have been crucial here. In the glow of flames, beads caught light. Pigments shone and words carried stories that linked them to identity and memory. The planetary backdrop adds further depth. As glaciers advanced and retreated, groups contracted and expanded, sometimes isolated, sometimes connected. Symbols and sounds offered continuity amid change, preserving identity when landscapes shifted. The ability to encode meaning in both durable objects and fleeting words gave humans resilience against instability. A lesser-known observation lies in the neurological demands of symbolism. Studies of modern humans show that interpreting symbols activates regions of the brain overlapping with those used in language. This suggests that from the beginning, symbol and sound were not separate domains, but overlapping capacities, each reinforcing neural pathways for abstraction and communication. Scale can also be seen in the persistence of symbols. While words vanish, beads and engravings endure across tens of millennia. Yet without sound, their meaning is often opaque. An engraved line may once have corresponded to a word or concept, but without that word, modern observers can only guess. This tension highlights the fragile but essential role of language. It is the bridge between symbol and meaning, without which symbols risk becoming mute. The convergence of symbol and sound may also have encouraged grammar. To describe a bead not only as bead, but as red bead or bead from the sea, required combining terms. The elaboration of symbols thus may have pushed humans toward more complex speech structures, intertwining material culture with linguistic innovation. At the planetary level, the emergence of symbols signals a threshold. It marks the point where human communication transcended the immediate, where identity, memory, and abstraction became part of daily life. Symbols bound communities across distance, while sound bound them across time. Together, they created a system greater than either alone. In the entwinement of symbol and sound lies one of the most decisive steps in human history: the ochre lines on stone, the beads strung on sinew, the sounds spoken around fire, all represent the same movement toward shared meaning. Through this convergence, humans began to speak not only of what was present, but of what could be imagined, remembered, or believed. The birth of language in this sense was never solely about voice or symbol, but about the weaving of both into the fabric of culture. As Homo sapiens spread beyond Africa, they encountered other branches of the human family: Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in the mountains of Central Asia, and perhaps still other groups now known only from genetic traces. All shared landscapes with modern humans for tens of thousands of years. These encounters raise profound questions about communication. Did different human species understand one another? Could they exchange sounds, gestures, or even words? Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that these meetings were not fleeting. Interbreeding left lasting genetic signatures. Almost all living people outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA, while Denisovan ancestry remains present in populations of Asia and Oceania. These traces confirm not only contact but intimacy, hinting at forms of coexistence more complex than conflict alone. If humans shared genes, it is reasonable to imagine they also shared sounds, perhaps even elements of language. A lesser-known detail comes from Neanderthal sites where symbolic behavior appears. Pigments, personal ornaments, and even cave art attributed to Neanderthals suggest minds capable of abstraction. The careful burial of individuals and the apparent use of feathers and talons as ornaments imply cultural traditions. Such practices would have been difficult to sustain without structured communication. Whether their speech mirrored that of Homo sapiens remains unknown, but the similarities in anatomy and behavior point toward some form of vocal language. The unresolved mystery lies in the degree of mutual intelligibility. If Neanderthals and sapiens both had language, were their systems close enough for shared understanding? Could they exchange information about hunting movement or identity? Or did each group's language stand apart like distant modern families? No definitive evidence answers this. The interactions may have ranged from partial comprehension to complete mutual understanding, varying by context and necessity. At the planetary scale, these encounters unfolded during the vast swings of the Ice Age. Glaciers covered much of northern Europe, pushing populations into refuges where contact became more likely. Valleys, caves, and river corridors served as meeting grounds. The planet's shifting climates both separated and reunited populations, shaping opportunities for interaction. Scale matters here. A valley may have sustained only a few hundred individuals at most, yet over millennia, these small groups encountered one another repeatedly. The interweaving of populations across such long time scales meant that communication, however rudimentary, would have shaped daily survival. A detail sometimes overlooked comes from the Denisova cave in Siberia, where a bone fragment was discovered belonging to a child with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. This single find demonstrates that groups not only met but lived together closely enough for offspring to be born. The implication is striking. Cultural and communicative exchange was likely as deep as genetic exchange. To live together required shared understanding, whether through gesture, sound, or words. Another layer of evidence comes from the FOXP2 gene associated with vocal control and sequencing. Both Neanderthals and Denisovans carried the same derived variant as modern humans. This suggests that the neural and anatomical foundations for complex speech were already present in their lineages. While this does not prove they spoke as humans do today, it strengthens the case that communication between species could have been more than gestural. The unresolved mystery lies in what was exchanged. Did sapiens and Neanderthals share hunting strategies, trade goods, or even stories? Or were their interactions limited to brief encounters with communication sufficient only for exchange or mating? Archaeology gives partial hints. Similar stone tool traditions appear in overlapping regions, suggesting influence in technique. Pigment use and symbolic practices also converge, perhaps through contact. These traces point toward some form of cultural transmission, though the extent is still debated. At the scale of daily life, the presence of another kind of human would have been profound. For sapiens leaving Africa, encountering Neanderthals in Europe, meant seeing beings who looked similar, yet distinct. They walked upright, used fire-made tools, and cared for their kin. The recognition of similarity may have opened doors to communication, while differences may have sharpened the need for markers of identity. Words and symbols could have played roles in both connection and distinction. Planetary cycles of warming and cooling added further complexity. During warmer interglacial periods, ranges expanded and groups may have met more frequently. During colder periods, populations retreated to refuges where sustained interaction may have deepened. Language in this context became not only a tool within groups, but a bridge or barrier between different kinds of humans. A lesser-known observation lies in the archaeological evidence of shared occupation of caves. At some sites, layers of Neanderthal and sapiens activity overlap, suggesting that groups used the same shelters, though not always at the same time. Such alternation implies knowledge of each other's presence. The communication of territory, whether through marks, symbols, or sounds, may have been necessary to navigate these overlaps. Scale can also be considered in terms of genetic legacy. The few percentage points of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans may seem small, but across billions of people, they represent a massive inheritance. Every breath taken today carries traces of these encounters. The role of communication in enabling them, though invisible, is no less significant. Another mystery concerns whether early humans borrowed words or sounds from other species. Just as languages today absorb terms from one another, perhaps sapiens once learned and used Neanderthal words, or vice versa. No direct evidence can confirm this, but the possibility lingers, reminding us of how porous the boundaries of culture may have been. At the planetary level, these meetings illustrate a broader pattern. Humanity did not emerge in isolation, but in dialogue with other kinds of humans. Language itself may have been shaped in part by these exchanges, stretched and adapted to bridge differences. In this sense, the voices of Neanderthals and Denisovans, though now silent, may still echo in the structures of human speech. The encounters between sapiens and their relatives reveal a world richer and more entangled than simple replacement. Sound and symbol likely crossed species lines, reinforcing the shared humanity of beings separated by lineage, but united by communication. Across Ice Age plains in mountain valleys, and within the shadows of caves, the voices of different humans once mingled. What they said to one another is lost, but the fact that they spoke at all remains one of the profound truths of prehistory. The growth of language is inseparable from the growth of kinship and the stories that bind people together. In small human bands, survival depended not only on hunting and gathering, but on remembering who belonged, who was related, and what obligations stretched across generations. Language provided the means to anchor these relationships in sound, to recall names, to trace lines of descent, and to transmit the customs that held groups together. Through kinship terms and shared stories, early humans wove themselves into webs of belonging that extended far beyond immediate presence. Archaeology gives indirect signs of these social ties. Burials dating back more than 100,000 years show careful placement of bodies, sometimes accompanied by objects or pigments. Such practices suggest more than disposal of the dead. They point toward recognition of relationship continuity and perhaps narrative about the person's life. To sustain such practices required communication, not limited to immediate action, but capable of expressing memory and meaning. A lesser-known detail comes from the distribution of shell beads and ornaments across regions. These objects often appear in clusters, implying not individual adornment, but shared traditions within groups. The spread of such traditions may reflect networks of kinship that extended beyond local bands, linking people through marriage, exchange, and alliance. To maintain such networks required language flexible enough to describe relationships, obligations, and ties that extended across distance. The unresolved mystery lies in how early humans expressed kinship. Did they already have words for mother, father-child or sibling in forms we might recognize? Or were relationships encoded through gesture and context with only proto-words emerging later? Linguists can reconstruct ancient language families only a few thousand years back, leaving the deep origins of kinship terms hidden. Yet, the universality of such terms across modern languages suggests they are among the oldest layers of human speech. At the planetary scale, kinship and story anchored human groups within the vast cycles of climate and migration. As glaciers advanced and receded, as deserts bloomed and withered, kinship networks preserved continuity. A person could move hundreds of kilometers, yet remain tied through marriage or descent to others far away. Storytelling reinforced these ties, carrying names of ancestors, places, and events across space and time. Such webs of kin and story acted as maps of belonging in a shifting world. Scale adds another perspective. A small band might number only 30 individuals, yet through kinship they were linked to hundreds more spread across valleys and rivers. Stories extended those ties further, recalling ancestors long dead, embedding the living in a chain of memory stretching beyond the horizon. Language gave form to this chain, allowing groups to speak of the absent and the past. Firelight provided the stage for much of this. In the evenings after the labor of the day, groups gathered around flames. Here, words could expand beyond immediate necessity, carrying myths, lessons, and memories. A child might learn not only who their relatives were, but where their ancestors had traveled, what animals they had hunted, what dangers they had faced. These stories reinforced kinship, turning personal ties into collective identity. A lesser-known observation lies in the persistence of mythic structures. Comparative studies of modern indigenous traditions suggest that certain narrative themes, origin of fire, journeys of ancestors, cycles of death and return, are widespread across continents. Some scholars propose that these themes may reach back into deep prehistory, perhaps tens of thousands of years preserved in oral traditions. If so, the roots of story may be nearly as old as language itself, carried across migrations and preserved by kin networks. The unresolved mystery concerns when narrative structure truly began. Did early humans already weave sequences of events into stories, or were their speech acts limited to description and instruction? Archaeological evidence cannot answer this, though symbolic artifacts suggest minds capable of sequencing and abstraction. Storytelling may have emerged, gradually growing from explanations of daily life into mythic accounts of origins. At the planetary scale, story gave humans resilience. As climates shifted and landscapes transformed, stories preserved memory of past conditions, guiding groups through new challenges. A drying lake might be recalled in story long after its waters vanished, ensuring future generations knew of its existence. In this way, narrative became a survival tool carrying ecological knowledge alongside kinship. Scale can also be seen in the time depth of oral tradition. In some modern cases, stories recall volcanic eruptions or changes in coastline that occurred thousands of years ago, preserved across generations. This capacity suggests that once narrative took form, it became one of the most enduring vessels of human knowledge. In deep prehistory, such endurance would have been invaluable, allowing groups to adapt to cycles of climate that spanned centuries. Another layer of evidence comes from rock art and symbolic objects which may have served as prompts for stories. A painted animal or engraved mark could anchor a narrative recalled and retold by elders. Words and symbols together created a dual system of memory, one fleeting, one enduring. The combination strengthened the web of kin and story, embedding meaning in both sound and object. A detail sometimes overlooked lies in the social role of language in dispute resolution. Kinship ties could create tension, as well as unity, and communication was necessary to manage obligations, resolve conflicts, and negotiate alliances. The elaboration of speech into forms suited for persuasion and negotiation may have grown alongside kinship networks, adding depth to the communicative repertoire. The unresolved mystery lies in how far these capacities extended among other human species. Did Neanderthals also tell stories around fires recounting kin and memory? Evidence of symbolic behavior among them suggests the possibility, though direct proof is absent. If so, the web of kin and story may be a shared inheritance of humanity, not unique to sapiens alone. At the planetary level, the expansion of humans into diverse environments made kinship and story even more critical. Groups separated by mountains, rivers, or deserts remained linked through marriage exchanges and narrative traditions. Such networks reduced isolation, enabling the flow of knowledge across vast distances. Language, in this sense, acted as a bridge, not only between individuals, but between landscapes, binding the species into a global web long before agriculture or civilization. In the end, the web of kin and story represents one of the deepest layers of human communication. Names for relatives, words for ancestors, narratives about journeys and origins. These are among the oldest structures of speech. They gave humans continuity in a changing world, anchoring them to one another and to their past. In the quiet gatherings around fire, in the retelling of journeys across rivers and valleys, language took root not only as a tool of survival, but as a vessel of identity. Through kinship and story, humans learned to belong, to remember, and to imagine themselves within the vast cycles of time. The emergence of grammar marks a turning point in the evolution of language, transforming scattered signals and words into systems capable of infinite expression. With grammar, humans could link words into phrases, specify who did what, to whom, place events in time, and describe not only the present but the imagined. Without grammar, communication remains bounded. With it, the possibilities expand beyond measure. Archaeology does not preserve grammar, yet its traces appear indirectly in the growing complexity of human behavior. The construction of elaborate tools, the coordination of long hunts, the transmission of knowledge across generations, all point toward structured communication. To describe how to make a multi-step tool to plan a hunt involving many roles to recount a journey across days, all require linking words into ordered sequences. This ordering is the essence of grammar. A lesser-known detail comes from the study of modern child language. Across cultures, children pass through similar stages: single words, two-word combinations, then increasingly complex sentences. This progression may echo the evolutionary path of language itself, moving from isolated signals to structured sequences. Just as children spontaneously impose grammar on their speech, early humans may have developed grammar as a natural consequence of expanding communication. The unresolved mystery lies in when this shift occurred. Did Neanderthals possess grammar, or was it unique to Homo sapiens? Did grammar emerge suddenly through a genetic or cognitive leap, or gradually as words accumulated and demanded structure? Linguists and anthropologists debate these questions, but consensus remains elusive. What is clear is that by the time humans painted caves and carried beads across continents, their language had already acquired complex grammar. At the planetary scale, grammar emerged during an epoch of profound change. The Ice Age imposed cycles of expansion and contraction, forcing humans to adapt to shifting environments. To coordinate survival in such unstable conditions, communication had to carry nuance. Grammar allowed instructions not only about what to do, but when, where, and under what conditions. The ability to express time, past, present, future, gave humans an advantage in planning and memory. Scale can be considered in terms of expression. With a vocabulary of a few hundred words but no grammar, communication remains limited. With grammar, even a small vocabulary can generate countless sentences. This combinatorial explosion may explain the sudden flourishing of symbolic culture around 50,000 years ago. Once grammar was in place, human expression could expand rapidly. Evidence from genetic studies adds another dimension. Variants of genes such as FOXP2 associated with speech and sequencing appear in both modern humans and Neanderthals. This suggests the capacity for structured communication was not limited to sapiens. The unresolved question is whether this potential was realized to the same extent. Some argue that the absence of clear evidence for Neanderthal art or long-distance networks implies their grammar was less complex. Others caution against underestimating them, pointing to recent discoveries of symbolic behavior. At the scale of daily life, grammar transformed communication. Hunters could say, "Not only there, bison, but the bison went there yesterday or tomorrow. We will go there together." Parents could tell children, "Not only fire hot, but do not touch the fire because it will burn." Such structures conveyed cause and effect, sequences of action, and hypothetical possibilities. The expansion of meaning through grammar deepened teaching, planning, and storytelling. A lesser-known observation lies in the role of grammar in marking relationships. Many modern languages use grammar to distinguish kin terms, status, or roles in interaction. If such structures existed in early human languages, they would have reinforced the web of kinship and identity, embedding social rules directly into speech. The unresolved mystery concerns whether grammar began with words for actions or for relationships. Did humans first develop ways of linking verbs and nouns, or did grammar emerge through markers of possession and kinship? Either path would have profound implications for the structure of early societies, but evidence remains absent. Planetary cycles of migration may have accelerated the elaboration of grammar. As groups spread into new environments, encountering new species landscapes and challenges, the need to describe and categorize grew. Language had to expand rapidly, and grammar provided the framework for such expansion. Without it, words would have multiplied chaotically. With it, they could be organized into coherent systems. Scale can also be seen in the preservation of memory. Grammar allowed humans to recall not only events but sequences, who did what first, who followed what the outcome was. Oral traditions could thus preserve history across generations, anchoring identity in narrative. Without grammar, stories would collapse into fragments. With it, they became enduring vessels of culture. Another layer of evidence comes from comparative linguistics. Despite their diversity, all known languages share underlying grammatical principles, such as the use of nouns and verbs and rules for combining them. This universality suggests a common origin deep in prehistory. While the details vary, the presence of shared structures across thousands of languages points to an ancient capacity that emerged before humans spread widely across the globe. A detail often overlooked lies in the role of negation. To say "not here" or "not now" requires a level of abstraction beyond naming. Negation implies the ability to conceive of alternatives to represent absence as well as presence. The emergence of grammatical negation may have been one of the crucial steps in language evolution, allowing humans to represent possibility and choice. At the planetary level, the dawn of grammar coincided with the expansion of symbolic culture. Cave art, ornaments, and ritual practices all appear more frequently after grammar's likely emergence. This suggests a deep connection. Once humans could structure words, they could also structure meaning in other domains. Grammar and symbolism reinforced one another, creating a feedback loop that propelled cultural growth. The unresolved mystery is whether grammar emerged once or multiple times. Did it appear in a single ancestral population spreading with migrations, or did it arise independently in different groups? Genetic and linguistic evidence cannot yet decide. But the universality of grammar today suggests a deep and ancient origin. In the end, the dawn of grammar represents the moment when language became open-ended, when humans could say not only what was, but what might be. It gave structure to thought, order to memory, and form to imagination. Across ice age plains and river valleys and caves and camps, humans spoke in sequences that carried meaning far beyond the moment. From those sequences grew stories, histories, and the foundations of culture. Grammar did not appear in an instant, but once it did, it transformed what it meant to be human. Even after decades of research across archaeology, genetics, and linguistics, the origins of language remain among the greatest mysteries of human prehistory. Fossils record bones, tools endure in stone, pigments persist in caves, but words vanish the moment they are spoken. Not a single syllable from the first human voices survives. What remains are fragments, clues in anatomy, traces of symbolic behavior patterns in genetics that hint at when and how language might have arisen. Yet the exact pathway, the first word, the first grammar, the first story, is forever beyond reach. A confirmed fact is that the anatomical capacity for speech existed long before writing or even symbolic art. The hyoid bone in Neanderthals, the descended larynx in Homo sapiens, and the shared FOXP2 gene all suggest that by at least 200,000 years ago, humans and their close relatives had the tools for complex vocalization. This much is certain: the voice was ready. What is unknown is whether it was used for language as we define it today, or for a more limited system of signals and chants. A lesser-known detail comes from the study of ear bones. Fossil evidence shows that early Homo species had auditory ranges tuned to the frequencies of human speech. This suggests that both speaking and listening co-evolved a refinement that would be unlikely without communicative need. Hearing and voice together formed a matched system. Yet even this cannot prove whether full language existed. The unresolved mystery, then, is cognitive. At what point did humans acquire not only the ability to make sounds, but the ability to use them symbolically to represent absent objects, to construct narratives? Did this leap happen gradually, as words accumulated and grammar emerged, or suddenly through a neurological shift? Scholars divide on this question, and the evidence remains inconclusive. At the planetary scale, the origins of language are bound to the rhythms of climate and migration. Glacial cycles created new landscapes, forcing humans to move, adapt, and innovate. Language may have been one of the tools that allowed survival across these vast transformations, enabling groups to plan, teach, and remember. Yet the link between environment and language remains largely speculative. We know that humans crossed deserts, forests, and ice sheets. We do not know what words carried them across. Scale can also be considered in terms of linguistic diversity. Today, more than 7,000 languages are spoken, many unrelated and mutually unintelligible. Their sheer number suggests that divergence has been ongoing for tens of thousands of years. But did all languages descend from a single proto-language spoken by the first humans, or did language emerge multiple times in different groups? This question remains unanswered. Some argue for monogenesis, a single origin. Others for polygenesis, multiple origins. Without evidence, both remain hypotheses. A detail often overlooked is the fragility of oral tradition. While some stories can endure for thousands of years, most vanish within centuries unless continually retold. If the first words were names for places kin or prey, they have been replaced countless times since. The earliest language is gone without trace, as lost as the voices that spoke it. Another layer of uncertainty comes from the role of other human species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps other groups interacted with Homo sapiens. Genetic and archaeological evidence shows symbolic behavior among them, implying communicative capacity. Did they possess full language? Could they converse with sapiens? Or were their systems distinct, mutually incomprehensible? The possibility that multiple species spoke each in their own way remains one of the most intriguing mysteries of prehistory. The unresolved question of musical origins adds further complexity. If language arose from song-like vocalizations, then its first forms may have sounded more like melody than speech. If instead it arose from gesture and was later vocalized, its earliest expressions may have been silent. These divergent theories reflect the absence of direct evidence, reminding us how much remains hidden. At the planetary level, the loss of knowledge is immense. For every cave painting that survives, countless others have vanished. For every bead preserved, thousands decayed. For language, the loss is absolute. What we reconstruct are only shadows inferred from what endures. The actual sounds of the first words, the rhythms of the first grammar, the cadences of the first stories, all are gone. Scale emphasizes the depth of this unknown. Humans have spoken for perhaps 200,000 years, yet writing has existed for only 5,000. More than 99% of linguistic history is unrecorded. The gulf between what was spoken and what is preserved is vast beyond measure. A lesser-known observation lies in the persistence of universals. Despite the loss of early languages, certain features appear in all known tongues: nouns and verbs, ways of marking time, means of negation. These universals suggest deep cognitive structures shared across humanity. While the first words are lost, their echoes may remain in the shared architecture of language itself. The unresolved mystery concerns the boundary between instinct and invention. Other primates use calls with specific meanings, but they do not combine them into grammar. At some point, humans crossed this threshold. How, why, and when remain unknown. Was it a gradual accumulation of complexity, or a sudden leap triggered by genetic or neurological change? Scholars propose models, but none can prove the case. At the scale of daily life, the unknowns remind us of the fragility of sound. A word once spoken vanishes unless heard, remembered, and repeated. For the first humans, every word was ephemeral, dependent on memory for survival. Language itself was a fragile thread, renewed each day in the voices of the living. At the planetary scale, language remains both universal and endlessly diverse. Every human speaks, yet no two languages are identical. This paradox reflects its origin, a shared capacity born deep in prehistory, expressed through countless forms across time. In the end, what remains unknown is greater than what is known. We do not know the first word, the first grammar, or the first story. We do not know whether language emerged once or many times, whether it was born from song gesture or sudden insight. We do not know how other humans spoke or how their voices mingled with ours. Yet in this uncertainty lies the wonder of the subject. Language, fragile and fleeting, has carried humanity across continents and millennia. Though its beginnings are hidden, its presence is undeniable, shaping every aspect of what it means to be human. The first words may be lost, but their legacy endures in every voice today.